A reading from the prophet Isaiah. Seek the Lord while he is still to be found. Call to him while he is still near. Let the wicked man abandon his way, the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn back to the Lord, who will take pity on him, to our God, who is rich in forgiving. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways not your ways. It is the Lord who speaks. Yes, the heavens are as high above earth as my ways are above your ways, my thoughts above your thoughts. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord is close to all who call him. The Lord is close to all who call him. I will bless you day after day and praise your name forever. The Lord is great, highly to be praised. His greatness cannot be measured. The Lord is close to all who call him. The Lord is kind and full of compassion, slow to anger, abounding in love. How good is the Lord to all, compassionate to all his creatures. The Lord is close to all who call him. The Lord is just in all his ways, and loving in all his deeds. He is close to all who call him, who call on him from their hearts. The Lord is close to all who call him.
A reading from the Philippians. Christ will be glorified in my body, whether by my life or by my death. Life to me, of course, is Christ, but then death would bring me something more. But then again, if living in this body means doing work which is having good results, I do not know what I should choose. I am caught in this dilemma. I want to be gone and be with Christ, which would be very much the better. But for me to stay alive in this body is a more urgent need for your sake. Avoid anything in your everyday lives that would be unworthy of the gospel of Christ. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Blessings of the King come to the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest heavens. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner going out at daybreak to hire workers for the vineyard. He made an agreement with the workers for 1 denarius a day and sent them to his vineyard. Going out at about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idly in the marketplace and said to them, 'You too are to go to my vineyard, and I will give you a fair wage.' So they went. At about the 6th hour, and again at about the 9th, he went out and did the same. Then at about the 11th hour he went out and found more men standing around. And he said to them, Why have you been standing here idle all day?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You go to my vineyard too." In the evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his bailiff, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, starting with the last arrivals and ending with the first." So those who were hired at about the 11th hour came forward and received 1 denarius each. When the first came, they expected to get more, but they too received 1 denarius each. They took it, but grumbled at the landowner. "The men who came last," they said, "have done only 1 hour, and you've treated them the same as us, though we've done a heavy day's work in all the heat." He answered one of them and said, "My friend, I'm not being unjust to you. Did we not agree on 1 denarius? Take your earnings and go. I choose to pay the last comer as much as I pay you. Have I no right to do what I like with my own? Why be envious because I am generous?" Thus, the last will be first, and the first last. The Gospel of the Lord. I don't know if Claire and Noel Kent, Father Thomas's parents, are watching. I know they often do. I have to tell you that we've been learning one of the phrases from Father Thomas's childhood, which has obviously stayed with him. He's very generous. He does much of the preparing of the food in the house, and he's very fair by quoting the rule that you taught him, that one cuts, the other chooses. You can tell he had 2 children, so I think it's quite common in many families with 2 children that there's always going to be that slight dispute about whether or not they got a bigger share than I did, and therefore if one cuts and the other chooses, it remains fair. Doesn't quite work for us, I have to say, in the household with 3 of us, because I'm not quite sure how you make that work with the Trinity. And in truth, given his appetite, Father Thomas usually ends up eating half of it, and Father Roy and I get a quarter each anyway. There could, of course, be the risk with that happening of hearing the cry again of children, "It's not fair." Perhaps one of the first phrases that we pick up on as a child, "It's not fair." And it's an instinctive reaction to this gospel, that those who come last and do least should be treated the same as the ones that came first. There may have been a contractual agreement with the early workers, and it has been honoured, but it doesn't seem fair. Today, there will be an employment tribunal hearing, possibly a strike. And it must have been felt even more acutely by the people listening to the Lord. These labour markets, where men stood in the square and waited for work, were vital. These were poor people, and a day's work literally made a difference between food on the table and going hungry that night. The book of Leviticus indeed confirms the significance of these arrangements when we read that labourers hired in this way for the day are to be paid at dusk, while it is still early enough for them to go off and to buy some food for themselves and for their families that they may survive that night. And as it were, to add injury to insult, these men who've come last would have been the weakest of the workers. When the owner comes in the morning, he will naturally compete with others to get those who are most capable of doing a hard day's work. With the harvest deadline, this is a very topical account. And the owner returns to see if there are others, and he hires them, with other owners doing the same. So you can imagine that the pool of labour during the day has been diminished, and by the time you reach the end, it is the weakest and those who are least able. And they get paid the same rate for their hour's work as the others have been paid for the day. I love the phrase in that gospel where it says the ones who came first took the money, but they moaned. They have that sense of it is not fair. And in truth, as we listen to this gospel, we ought to respond and thank God for the fair that it is, in a sense, unfair. Because it's a powerful parable that reminds us of God's generosity, to the way in which he responds to us when we are in need, be it in the first watch or the third, a generosity which we struggle to understand. You've grown up with that mantra of the world: if you want something, you must earn it. You get what you pay for. The danger is perhaps that we start to apply that relationship that the world has evolved to our thinking about our own relationship with God. The Gospels are full of encounters with those who are sick and lame, the deaf and the blind, the sinners and the misguided. These are the ones to whom the Lord turns, to whom he talks, the ones who he calls, the ones he heals. It's a challenge to the values of the world, where those who achieve are respected, those with skills, abilities, opportunities are praised. But the first reading this evening reminded us, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways not your ways. It is the Lord who speaks. Yes, the heavens are as high above the earth as my ways are above your ways, my thoughts above your thoughts. There could, of course, be a danger that we therefore conclude that it is simply possible for us to relax and to wait, to become perhaps spiritually lazy and weak. The risk being that when the call comes, we may miss it. We may just hope that he'll be back later in the day at another hour. And the first reading also speaks clearly to us about the way in which we are called to be ready, to be prepared, and to respond. It says, "Seek the Lord while he is still to be found, call to him while he is still near."